In this lesson, we will talk about how to animate a path using a few different methods. Okay, so I want to animate a path that kind of comes up here from this lower left corner and then extends out through the top right corner. And I want it to kind of look like a graph maybe that's growing as we move through this area here. And one of the first things I want to do is, since we moved this circle up a little bit, I want to move my null object to reposition my camera just so that this is a little bit better centered in the middle of my comp before I get started drawing any new artwork. So let's go ahead and grab our null object, and we'll hit the U key just to bring up those keyframes. And I'm dragging my current time indicator back to that last keyframe and holding shift just so it snaps into position. And now I'm just going to grab the null object and reposition it so that all of those shapes that you see are right in the middle of the comp. So now that teal solid or teal shape there looks a lot lower than it did earlier. But overall, visually, this looks a little bit more balanced. So once you're happy with the position that you've set up there with your new keyframe, let's go ahead and begin to draw a new line in our composition. So I'm going to do that by adding a shape layer. So you can come up here and go to Layer, New, Shape Layer. And I want to create a line that is really only defined by the stroke. It's not going to have a fill. So to do that, I'm going to come in here and change the fill itself to really just be the non-existent fill, so none. And so what I did was I just clicked on the word fill and it brought up my fill options. So I can go ahead and just choose that none option there, which is similar to the none option you would see in Photoshop or Illustrator. Then you can just go ahead and say okay, and the shape I draw will not have a fill now. And I also am aware that 10 pixels is probably not going to be big enough, so I'm going to go ahead and turn that up a little bit. And then we're also going to come over here and grab the pen tool, and that's what we are going to use to create the line that we're going to be making. So with a graph, a lot of times you get highs and lows, so I'm just going to kind of start down here in this lower left hand corner and then move up through the composition and then back down about right there and then back out through the top. So really just kind of a simple line that has a little bit of a zigzag in it. And then I can grab my selection tool and maybe grab a few of these points and just make them maybe a little bit more dynamic, just so this kind of zigzag that it creates there is a little bit different from the one we see here at the top. So just coming in there and adding some variation, some contrast is going to help the overall composition. Okay, so now I want my camera to be able to recognize this, so I'm going to move this down with the rest of my layers, and that's just going to be right there beneath the swatches layer, and I'm going to turn it into a 3D layer. Now you see that automatically that pushed this layer pretty far back and made it quite a bit smaller. So what I'm going to do is just scale this up. So I'm just going to grab this upper right hand corner and hold the shift key to scale that up. And if you want to, you can even change the Z position a little bit. Maybe you want to push that backwards. So now it's behind all of these layers, and we can see how the blending mode is affecting that differently now. So that's kind of interesting. So I'm going to push that back a little bit more and then scale it up just a bit. And maybe I want to even rotate this a little bit. So the highest point is maybe more like right there. So I can grab that rotation and make sure that I'm rotating along the Z axis. So hover over that Z handle and we'll rotate it backwards to the left just a bit there. So now we have a little bit more of a perfectly diagonal line there in the middle of our composition. And I want to reposition this first point here. So I can go into the shape layer itself to get to that point. And I'm going to click on the path, and you see that now allows me to click that anchor point. I'm just going to move that over here more into the lower left hand corner. Okay, so now that we have this in position, and once you get happy with the way that this looks, we want to add some kind of an animation to this. So what I want it to look like is that it's going to enter down here from the lower left hand corner and begin to draw on in this manner that we've really drawn the path to take. So if you've animated anything in the past that has this kind of a points system, or the vertexes that we see creating this, you may want to go in and individually animate those points. And that definitely would be an option that you could change. You would have to come in here wherever you want that first point to be, and you would come down here to the path option, and you would just start to animate that path by setting keyframes. So I could set that first keyframe there, maybe push that forward, and then come up and just drag this down and start moving these keyframes around. But you see how whenever these vertexes overlap each other, we start to get some kind of strange results, and you really have to zoom in very close to be able to see how to fix that. And you also notice that now it's not really appearing like it's drawing on. It almost looks like it's scaling up from that point. So there's a lot of things that would go into using this method to making this animation actually look like it's being drawn on. And it's a little bit difficult. So I'm going to go ahead and delete those keyframes just so we're back where we started, and show you a much easier way to create this type of an animation. Okay, so with this layer selected, we're going to come over here to this little flyout menu you see that says Add. So go ahead and click that, and you see that we have a few things here that really actually act as animation presets. So they're just in a slightly different place, and you're not going to find them in the animation presets menu. You have to get them through this little Add flyout. So what we're going to use is the Trim Paths option. So go ahead and click that. And automatically it's not going to give you any keyframes, so we're going to have to set those up. So let's move back to the point where we want our animation to begin. So I'm going to do that just right about here where the last keyframe of my null object is. And then I'm going to drop down this Trim Paths option, and the end is what we're looking at here, the end property. So where it says 100%, just drag this down. And you can see what's happening is that it's basically taking that stroke away along that path as we bring that down to 0. So if I take it all the way down to 0, I no longer see the path at all. So this is really where I want to start from. So I'm going to go ahead and hit that end property there to start that stopwatch. And then I'm going to move forward and give it, let's say, about 3 seconds to animate on. So we'll just go in right there between the 12 and the 14 to about 13 seconds. And then I'm going to drag this all the way up to 100. So now let's do a quick frame preview just to see the animation that we've created. I'm just going to go ahead and trim that work area to this point right here, and we'll hit the 0 key to start our RAM preview. Okay, so now that RAM preview is complete, let's go ahead and watch that back. So we've created a pretty interesting animation here, and really we've only had to set 2 keyframes. It's a lot less effort than going in and trying to animate the path by itself. And we could even come in here and turn on motion blur for that layer, and we see that now if we were going to watch a RAM preview of that, we would be able to see that motion blur that's created there on the end of that layer. So really this is a very quick way to animate a path and get a really good result. So in this lesson we learned that for just animating a path to reveal, it's much easier if you just use the Trim Paths preset, but it's not quite as customizable as moving the points and keying the path by hand.